I'm Matt Downing, and welcome to Diving Deep EDU.
Curious conversations with all types of peeps. Encouraging innovation, we are diving deep. Certainly education is what we like to speak. Fervent with dedication, now it is time to teach. Yeah.
Hey everyone, and thanks for joining me on Diving Deep EDU. This podcast is based in conversations that are willing to go off on a rabbit trail or two in order to find those aha moments. Those times when someone is able to say something in a way that brings increased clarity. Now, I'm an educator, so much of our conversations will have that as the end goal. How can the things that we are talking about help us to dive deeper into educational practices? Thanks for tuning in. Our guest today is Sam Willoughby. Sam is a two-time BMX World Champion, 2012 Olympic Silver Medalist, and coach to his wife, Elise Post, who's shooting for gold at the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. Sam, thank you so much for joining me. You and your wife are getting ready for Tokyo 2021. What is the process like preparing for the final stretch? It's almost there, right? It's about a month or two away. The final stretch of competing at the Olympic Games.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We're in the exciting part of it, and also a little bit stressful part. You know, you put this plan together, kind of years in advance, and then with everything that happened in 2020, it all got pushed a year, and you had to adapt and change. But that's a skill in itself. So it's getting down to that time now where we're kind of approaching the 12 weeks out mark, and you start looking at your plan on paper, and you naturally you have those moments of second guessing, or is it going to come together, or is that right, or is this right, and ultimately it's about backing the decisions you made when you're in a good a removed calm place 12 months ago, and adapting as you need to, but along with that there's a lot of excitement because there's so much good that's coming together, for Elise in our preparation, and fortunate to have some very great people in our corner, and this is kind of why we do it. This is what gets the juices going, is going out there and testing yourself.
How did you guys shift and adapt when they, canceled 2020 Tokyo and rescheduled it for 2021?
Yeah, it was obviously disappointing for Elise. I mean, she was in such good shape. She started the year out winning the first two World Cups. She was the current world champion and was heading into Tokyo in 2020 with, great expectations. And then to kind of have that, shut off, and not to as well, the World Championships were scheduled for May, and they were meant to be in Houston. So for her to have a home World Championship to lead into the Olympics would have been just an amazing experience. But at the same time, it was she took a few weeks to kind of reset and allow that disappointment to set in a bit, but also just allow yourself to shut down and switch off for a little bit and take a breath. And then that was kind of, for me as the coach, that was my time to go to work and reset the plan and think about how can we use this time to our advantage now. Like, what can we do a little bit better that we didn't want to mess with, in 2020, because you just, you don't want to change everything in those last few months. So it gave us some time to address some areas in performance that we may not have touched if the games were held in 2020.
Sam, you left home at the age of 16 to pursue your dream of BMX. That caught my eye. I'm really curious about that. Tell us that story.
Yeah, so I had a dream from when I was about 8 years old that I wanted to go to America and race BMX professionally. I remember Mum tells the story. It was a Wednesday night out at Cross Keys BMX in Adelaide, where I grew up, and I was reading the BMX Press magazine, which mum and dad would get us with our can and bottle money every month. Um, and I was flicking through there, and it always had like a section in the middle, about 2 pages of, color pictures and articles of American racing and just a little update of what's going on abroad. And um, I just always remember looking at that section, and it just, the colors were brighter, the tracks were bigger, the stadium, there was indoor races, all the manufacturers were based in America, and it just looked bigger and better. And I said to my mum that night that I wasn't going to get a real job and I was going to go to America and race BMX professionally. And I think she kind of laughed. And my mum's a school teacher, so she was very much like, well, you need to finish school first. But that was what I said, and that was my dream from that day forward. And when I turned 16, I just won the Junior World Championships in China. And I came home from that trip in China. It was around June of 2008. And I wanted to go to America at the end of that year to race the ABA Grands. That's the big race over Thanksgiving weekend in Tulsa, where they decide the national number one pro. And I just wanted that was my dream, to go to that race. And I said to mum and dad, if I save up enough money, can I get a ticket and go and race the back half of the year across the fall months in America? And they were like, yeah, sure. And my dad and my brother are in the building industry in Australia, so in my school holidays they got me some side work with bricklayers and plumbers and that kind of thing. And I'm not very handy at all compared to the rest of my family, but I guess I just did kind of the crappy jobs that they didn't want to do, and passed them tools and that kind of stuff, and saved up a bit of cash and bought myself the cheapest ticket I could find, which was on Air China, and I think it went Adelaide, Sydney, Auckland, Taipei, and then eventually to LA. But I made it to LA, and it was meant to be a 3-month trip that mum and dad, I think, thought was just going to be a bit of experience for me, and I have never come home.
So those 3 months passed, and what did your family say? What was their support like? What was their guidance like?
Yeah, so I was fortunate in that I don't have the story of not supportive parents. My parents were and still are to this day amazingly supportive, and so I was never going to go to America and be stuck on the streets. But they definitely, as I look back now, and I talk to 16-year-olds now, and I imagine their parents letting them go, and it was a big decision for them to make. For me at the time, I was just like, I'll be fine, I got to go. Like, I organized it all, and that was part of my task. Was mum and dad wanted to see how are your internal flights in America going to look, and who are you going to stay with. And so I had to plan all that and show that there was a plan in place, and I wasn't just going to sleep on a floor somewhere in LA. So yeah, got the plan together, and Elise was kind of already in the picture at that point. We'd met at the World Championships in China earlier that year, and talking on the internet and stuff, and somehow she convinced her parents to allow me to come and stay with them and travel around with them. And I don't know how she convinced. They laugh about it still, of the fact that their daughter said there's a 16-year-old boy from Australia that's going to come stay with us. But I guess that shows the power of Elise when it comes to convincing people of stuff. She got that from her mother. So yeah, anyway, took off, and I think if you ask my mum now, it wasn't an easy decision, and
Right.
it was but something that they felt would they could see that I was pretty dedicated at what I wanted to do, and that I was driven, and it wasn't just a trip to go and goof off in America. It was to kind of try to pave my way and see where I fitted in the world of BMX.
Yeah, there's something powerful when you follow your passions, when you follow something that you love, and it's not easy, right? It's not easy for your parents. Like I'm sure if we brought them on this conversation, it's very complex. Like, what do we do? How do we manage this? Our child who's obsessed over this BMX, and sort of allowing him to flourish and experience that and really live out his dream and his passions and his skills. And this is a very difficult thing for people to do, and people struggle with this day in and day out. And you obviously pursued your passions, right? Full throttle. I'm going to work. I'm going to take a plane, 5, 6 layovers, get there to LA. What would you advise, whether it be to young people or other people, just a general advice to other people who are seeking to pursue their passion?
Yeah, well, I think that's the first, step to finding, I guess, your place of it is finding what you love to do, and
Mm,
then having the willingness to put, your best foot forward at
yeah.
whatever that might be, but also understanding the practicality side of it, and that it can't just, for us to exist and live in this world, it has to be practical from a work standpoint, from a financial standpoint. There has to be a long-term plan with it. I mean,
Mhm.
it can't obviously just be throwing the ball at the back fence, because
Mm.
there's not a lot of places you can go with that. So it has to be realistic, and it has to be measurable, and it has to be attainable. And I think that's one of the biggest things is to not be afraid. People shouldn't be afraid to dream big, and to not confuse goals with expectations.
So, as we're dreaming big, as we're sort of chasing our passions, how do we fan that flame? How do we grow and build structures to support those dreams and passion?
Something that I did throughout my career, which at times was criticized, was I always acknowledged the what ifs, and I think it's really important that we do that and don't shy away from the things that could go wrong. And it's not about dwelling on them, but it's about acknowledging them and coming up with coping strategies and ways of how you're going to manage those things, because it's really not a matter of if but when with any venture that you set out on. That there will be rocks in the road, and there'll be, you might have to change the path a bit, go sideways in order to go upwards. And so I think acknowledging those what ifs has to be a big part of the plan. And planning to that's a part of planning to succeed, as well. And not getting too far ahead of yourself to where you get lost from the process and just jump right ahead to the outcome and just go, that's where I'm going. I think it's good to acknowledge the outcome at the start. Like for me, it was, I want to be a professional BMX racer in America, and I want to, win the ABA title within America. But okay, that's great. That's the goal. It's almost like I didn't even need to write that down, because that was a
Yeah.
given. But then it was about figuring out, okay, what's the steps, what's the process, and how is this going to look? How is this going to play out? What are some of the what ifs that may arise, and how am I going to deal with them? And you don't have all the answers, and that's okay. But
Mm.
at least trying to acknowledge and be as best prepared as you can to adapt along the way.
Some people might say, you flying to America at 16 to pursue that dream was a little extreme. You know, Sam, you don't have to do that. Why can't you just ride in Australia? Can't you ride in somewhere a little bit closer, maybe New Zealand or something like that? You don't need to come all the way to America at 16. What would you say to that?
I would say to, yeah, never be afraid to, step outside of your comfort zone. I think
Mm,
we learn so much about ourselves, when we are put outside of our comfort zone. But also don't be afraid to put ourselves outside of that, because it can be very easy to fall into a rut of just going with what's easy and what feels good at the time, and sometimes what feels good right now doesn't feel so good down the track. So
mm,
um, yeah, for me, it wasn't even about like, oh, that's an extreme step. It was the only step, because that
yeah.
was part of the process to get to what I believed the ultimate outcome was that I wanted to get to.
And what did you do about school?
So like I said, my mum's been a school teacher all her life, and so that was a big thing for us, that I had to complete school, like complete my year 12, which I wasn't great at school, and honestly didn't enjoy school that much. So I had to go and luckily in Australia we have some good programs that allow you to do school by correspondence. And so there was a college in Adelaide where I grew up called Martin College, which was kind of set up for this sort of situation where someone had, athletes had to leave the country, or were traveling a and needed to homeschool, or even just people that struggled with in-person learning, and needed to adapt their education a little bit. So they were able to set me up on a course, kind of online, which I completed. Basically completed half of my year 12. Sorry, half of year 11 and all of my year 12,
Mm.
by correspondence, online when I was in America.
So you mentioned, you didn't really love school. I can relate. I didn't really love school. Most kids, sadly, right, they don't really love school. But you love BMX, right? They didn't have to like coax you onto the
No.
track. They had to like keep you off of it. What was it? Like what stoked that love of being out there and comparing it to the things that you didn't love in school?
So I think for me for BMX it was the head to head competition. That's what I just embraced and loved, was trying to
Yeah.
beat the person next to me, and the challenge that came with, not in a malicious way, but in the challenge that came with that. In that BMX is an individual sport, and it was all on me, and I enjoyed that pressure and that challenge of, how am I going to plan to be better than I am right now, or better than I was yesterday,
Mm.
and what does that look like, and breaking the sport down. And it's a relatively young sport from a training standpoint and a technology standpoint, so that it was somewhat of a blank canvas, and kind of drawing from other sports and being prepared to look outside the box a bit, and really challenging the ways that it could be gone about to become successful in BMX. And so I enjoyed the thinking and the research side of that, but I think I enjoyed it because I was passionate about it, and I could see where that learning was going. As far as school now, like going through, and probably most adults could say this, but going through the process that I went through with BMX, and the I think I've learned how to learn, if that makes sense.
Oh,
And I could go
interesting.
back
Yeah.
and do school and really enjoy it. And a lot of the stuff I'm doing now with, doing a little bit of, schooling at the moment, with some physiology stuff, to help with my coaching. And I really enjoy it. But it was just, I think, just an immature learning mind at that age, and not understanding that, in order to learn a skill that will maybe benefit what you want it to benefit, doesn't necessarily have to be specifically in the learning process, doesn't have to be specifically related to that. You can take skills out of any situation and then adapt and mold them. And I learned that the most, through my, I guess we haven't really touched on my injury yet, but through what happened with my injury, and
Mhm.
how adaptable my skill set was from sport to then go and deal with my injury.
I think there's so much we could learn by just finding out what young people or anyone what they love and what drives them and how they engage with that and then bringing that to the schools. Sometimes I feel like schools are just trying to like force kids not to do stuff they love about in this like boring brick building, It's kind of sad to think about that.
Because we do learn so much better when we're doing something that we love. Yeah, and it's really just can't. I guess there are plenty of creative educators out there that are doing it and doing it
Hmm.
really well.
Yeah.
There's obviously still probably a lot of educators though that are very stuck in the basic, or the standard way, which works for some, but not for
Hmm.
all. And I think teaching is one of the hardest jobs in the world. Like going in and
Hmm.
being around my mom when she's done it, and just, it's the brain is so complex, and
Yeah.
everyone's so different in so many ways. And being, trying to teach a class of 20, 30 individuals is
Hmm.
very talented people, educators are. And I know that even like, just we've done some coaching clinics and different things just with younger kids within BMX, and that's something that they love. And just trying to, one kid to the next, they just
Hmm.
have to be taught so differently, and the language and the approach has to be so different. They can be the same age and both doing something they love, but the things that get through are very different.
I was telling a friend that I was having you on the podcast, and he was like, "Matt, ask him about his first legit bike. I want to know that first bike he had." I'm like, "Really? Like, you think that'd be interesting?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. Everyone's gonna want to know that. So tell us."
So my first race bike was just a little 16-inch that we got from a garage sale. But then the first brand new bike I had from the bike shop was a Talker Ridgeback. So it was probably bigger than the bike I ended up racing on, at the end of my professional career, because mum and dad just went and got the strongest um, bike that my brother and I could both race on and, ride around the street and jump dirt jumps on and ride at the skate park. And this was a big chromoly bike and it had two like double tubing down the top tube, so that I guess that created the Ridgeback look, which is why it's a Talker Ridgeback. But yeah, that was the first brand new bike I had.
Let's travel back in time, like 10 years or so prior to the 2012 Olympics where you won silver. What were some factors of your training that helped you achieve that success?
My work ethic and my process driven mentality was ultimately what allowed me to probably get that success I was only 20 years of age in London. So I think, yeah, my ability at that age to break things down to the finer details and be prepared to work on those individual weaknesses and strengths in order to make my whole package a bit stronger. I think they were probably the two attributes that helped me throughout my whole career, but especially to have a lot of success at a young age.
Now, you've mentioned this before, the idea of process. Bring us into that a little bit more. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, so to me, process driven is the ability to break down the skill within the skill, or to, yeah, I guess just break things down to I guess a more complex version of what the ultimate outcome is, in order to make those individual processes better, in order to make the outcome better. And I guess it's yeah, not confusing specificity with it's being prepared to understand that, just if you practice one skill, you're only going to get as good as you can get at that one skill. There's going to be a point where it plateaus, and in order to better that skill, it has to be broken down even further, to the point where you basically take a step back in order to take two forward. So, that's like with anything with strength training, for example, it's the willing, if you want to get stronger, you're not just going to lift your maximal weight all the time. You would probably, find a percentage of that, or find a point within that lift where you're weak, and isolate that one area in order to make the bigger area, or the actual skill, better.
So, give us an example of how you applied that to BMX leading up to the 2012 Olympics.
BMX, I mean, there's so many areas of our sport. There's the gates, there's the technical aspect, there's the mental aspect, there's the physical aspect, the tactical aspect. So I guess for me, to give an example, I needed in order to be successful at that Olympics and the World Championships that year, I was 20 years of age. My biggest competition was 25, and he was 6 foot tall, very strong, muscular guy, with a huge foundation under him. So for me, I needed to get a lot more power and a lot stronger, put more muscle on. And so I guess the process of that was, pushing myself back to, throughout 2011 and 2010, was breaking myself down, really, to become bigger and stronger, and ultimately not having a lot of success, especially in 2011, in order to be bigger and better and stronger in 2012.
What's something from those games that continues to replay in your mind?
Something that really stands out is I had a really bad first day of competition, so I barely made it out of the heats. I went in as the world champion, and just I guess the pressure in the moment got to me a little bit. And I remember going back to my room, and I'd received like a lot of handwritten letters from kids in schools in Australia, and I didn't want to open any of them before the event, because that was one of my, I guess, processes or goals, was trying to and I think looking back, it was probably a detriment, in that I was trying to pretend the moment wasn't big rather than acknowledging that it was and then coming up with
Interesting.
coping mechanisms. Um, so I remember going back after that day and having a phone call with my dad and my brother, and they kind of related it to a football game because they love football. And you had a nervous first quarter, and you get to reset now and come out and it's a new day tomorrow. And I remember that phone call pretty vividly, but I also remember just kind of saying screw it and going and opening some of those letters and
Mm.
reading it from kids. And it was just really refreshing to just read some letters that were just so far removed from the Olympics. And I mean, they were related to the Olympics, but
Yeah.
they were kids writing
Mhm.
authentic letters with, crayons and lead pencil and just, saying just the funniest stuff. And most of
Yeah.
them were just kids telling me about themselves and
Mhm.
their lives and, how they got a dog and dad's a fireman and just, and it was just, I guess a bit of a reality check to be like,
Mhm.
well, all right, this is not bigger than life, but it's important and it means something to you. So just go and put your best foot forward and do what you can do and control the controllables and it'll
Mhm.
be what it will be. And so I guess it just put my feet back on the ground a little bit from, going in there with this mindset of, I'm not going to feel the pressure. Not, it's not a big deal. I'm just going to go and race and not really acknowledging it. And then kind of being hit in the face like, hey, this is massive. And, and then, reading those letters and going, okay, I've acknowledged it. I recognize it. And now go out and do your job.
What would you say to kids like those that wrote letters to you or kids that you're interacting with and they're like, "Yeah, I wanna go to the Olympics. I want to compete with BMX. I wanna be a world champion." What would you tell them?
I would say that's fantastic. Like, go for it. And don't when we're talking about kids like that young, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, like that's the first step. Have a dream and dream big
Mhm.
um, and go out and tackle it, and don't be afraid to fail, and don't be afraid to try things. And I think at those ages, like more is better. Just do what you love and
Mhm.
do it a lot and learn about yourself.
Sam, you had a tragic accident in 2016. For our listeners who might not know what happened, can you briefly describe it?
Yeah, so in 2016, 3 weeks after the Rio Olympic Games, I had a training accident at my local track here in Chula Vista in San Diego, where I was doing a routine warm up and basically flipped off the back of my bike and went up in the air into like a half backflip and came down, landed on the top of my head, and broke my neck at C5, 6, 7, and was basically instantly a quadriplegic. So since
Mhm.
that was September 10th of 2016, so I have yeah, been in a wheelchair since, and yeah, at the moment of the accident, I was yeah instantly paralyzed. Legs were instantly paralyzed, and eventually actually lost movement in my upper extremities and hands as well. Which fortunately I've been able to get back, but still, yeah, considered a quadriplegic. I still have some less function in my left hand, and basically, uh, yeah, motionless and no feeling, sort of from about my nipples down.
The doctor said, like you just mentioned, that you would never be able to walk, but you were able to walk and you were able to dance on your wedding day. How did that happen?
Yeah, so that was kind of I guess, a goal of mine right after my accident. It was a pretty low point right
Mhm.
after my accident where I actually said to my wife that my now wife, fiance at the time, we were set to get married about 7 months after my accident. And the first thing I said to her when she seen me in hospital was, "You're not marrying me, you're not marrying a cripple." She basically held my hand and with a tear in her eye said, "I'm not going anywhere, and we're going to get through this together."
Mm.
And yeah, after those words, I guess I vowed that it didn't really matter to Elise, but to me, it was important for me to show. I didn't know what my outcome was going to be at that point. I didn't know what the next steps were. The doctor had talked about permanent paralysis, but it was so early on that, my dream and my goal is to get back on my feet. And I wanted to stand at our wedding, and I wanted at least to have wedding photos that looked like what we were. And that was important to me. And so, yeah, I worked my butt off. We postponed our wedding. We postponed it it was meant to be in April, and we pushed it to New Year's Eve that same year. So it allowed me, I guess, that was about 15 months of rehab. And I was able to get to a point where I had enough strength in my hands to hold onto a walker and stand up with the assistance of, I had some like leg braces on that were kind of helping me keep my knee locked out. And yeah, I guess with my gained bit of core strength and upper body function, I was able to stand at our wedding. And ultimately I was able to train myself to, although I don't have function in my legs, kind of manipulate the spasms and the tone I have in my hips and my quads to allow me to walk down the aisle with Elise.
There's obviously many facets to the recovery process, right? It's multidimensional, it's complex. As I'm thinking about that, I'm wondering if a big part of the recovery process also had to deal with some identity. How did you grapple and understand your identity in the wake of an accident like that?
Yeah, it was pretty tough. Like initially I went through some pretty hard times of burying my head in the sand and feeling like the only way out of this for me was to walk again, and the only way that I could be comfortable within my own skin was to stand up and walk again. I didn't like who I seen when I looked in the mirror. I didn't feel comfortable in public, and basically shut myself in the house for the good part of the first 8 months and just did rehab every day. And at that point, I needed assistance of everything. I mean, getting into bed, putting on my shoes, taking a shower, going to the bathroom, getting in a car. Couldn't really do much at all for myself. And I really didn't want to learn how to do it in a wheelchair because I didn't want that to be my life. And it was around April of 2017, so basically 7 or 8 months after my injury. My brother was living over with us, with him and his wife, and at the time the newborn son. And Matt was just helping me with all my rehab, and we've been best friends all our lives. And so he was here as like a support mechanism and just helping in any way he could. He quickly became basically a spinal cord injury therapist, and just took to it and helped me. And it got to around April, and he said, like, we need to get out the house. Like, I just didn't want to leave the house, didn't want to be seen in public. I worried about what people would think if they seen me with Elise, and I wasn't happy with the person I seen in the mirror. And anyway, there was a NASCAR race on in Fontana, which was a couple of hours from our house, and Matt knew I loved NASCAR, so he arranged for some tickets through a friend of ours that worked in the industry. And this particular friend said, he arranged this sort of VIP experience. And basically he'd said that, I do all that, go meet and greet all the drivers, but at 10 a.m., like, I want you to go to the number 13 truck and meet this guy I know. I've known him for 30 years. His name's Booty Barker, and he's in a wheelchair, but I need you to go and meet this guy. And at the time, first of all, I didn't even want to go to the race because I didn't want to be seen in public. But Matt essentially, threw me in the car and took me there. And then I definitely didn't want to go and meet anyone in a wheelchair because at that point, I didn't really want to talk to anyone in a wheelchair because I didn't want to know anything about living in a wheelchair because I didn't want that to be me. And I hate to say that now, but that was how I felt at the time. And so anyway, we went and went to the number 13 truck, and there was Booty. He comes wheeling out in his wheelchair and introduces himself, and he's just the most upbeat, outgoing guy you've ever seen. And here he is, 30 years later, from the exact same injury as I had, running this multi-million-dollar, NASCAR Cup team. He's the crew chief of the team. He's an engineer. And the first thing he said to me was like, how long you been hurt for? And I said, oh, 7 months. And he's like, cool, you look great, brother. Like, what are you going to do now? And I didn't really know how to answer that because I didn't know. And my brother kind of stepped in and he said, oh, Sam's, working hard on some rehab, and he wants to be able to stand at his wedding. And so he's working at that. And Booty, he's got a Southern accent. He's from West Virginia. And he was like, cool, man, then what? And and I was definitely didn't know how to answer that. And my brother kind of asked Booty, he's like, so you could tell Matt was a bit awkward when he was asking it. He was like, so when did you, stop rehab? And he's like, rehab? I didn't do no rehab. They told me if you put your shoes on, you can leave hospital. I did that in 3 weeks, got the hell out of there, got an engineering degree, and got on with it. And and then we were, even more taken back. And then he looked at my brother and he said, here's the deal. Him and I are the same as you. We're just gonna have to drag ourselves around a little more. And those words just really resonated with me because until that point, I'd been told like, you're gonna need a minivan, you're gonna need assistance with this, and traveling's gonna be, you're gonna need help with that. You're gonna need, if you go travel, you're gonna have to stay in this special hotel room and all this stuff. And then there was this guy that's actually living it and had the same injury that's just figured it out and doesn't do any of that stuff, and drives an F-350 truck and lives in a totally normal house, no adaptive stuff, and just makes it happen. And for me, it was just a new outlook on life and my possibilities and the ability to be independent again and the ability to exist in society. And that was like my wake up moment, I guess, of like, this can be what you make it, this can be however you want it to be. And that was where I really, we left that day and I went home, and yes, I still had the ultimate goal of wanting to stand and walk at the wedding, but the ultimate goal from then on was I want to be independent, and I want to be, a part of society, and I want to be, if I'm going to be in this wheelchair, I'm going to be the best version of Sam Willoughby in a wheelchair. And I'm going to figure it out and find a way. And it was slow. I mean, I didn't just come home from that meeting with Booty and just, become, I guess, as independent and as happy as I am today. It took another good year or so, but it was about, from that point on, I'm going to put my own shoes on. I'm going to figure out, how to do it myself. The first time I dressed myself, it took 35 minutes. And by the time I was done, I just laid on the bed and went back to sleep because I was exhausted. But it got better and better. And I think that's the biggest challenge of this injury. I mean, I went from sitting on the start gate at the Olympic Games in Rio, where the biggest challenge was nailing the start and coming across the finish line in first, and everyone telling you you're Superman, and to 3 weeks later, learning how to hold a toothbrush, learning how to put my shoes on again, and learning how to take a shower by myself again. And that's a gut punch. That's a reality check at 25 years of age. And it takes I guess you got to dig pretty deep to get motivated to do those tasks. But I guess I really just drew back on the mentality I had in sport and the lessons that BMX taught me. And that when you break down break down an outcome into a process and get the same satisfaction out of achieving and bettering those individual little processes as you would for the ultimate outcome, that's when you start to set off on a real path for success.
How do you think your view of maybe yourself or just like your view of the world has shifted or changed as a result of, that tragedy? To say it another way, how do you view the world or yourself differently today than you did in 2012?
I don't think I view it much differently. It's just that the goalposts have changed a bit, in that At the start of the injury, I remember laying in hospital, and I had those moments where it was like, oh, I just, in tears, and I just want to go back to what it was before. That's a natural reaction when anything goes wrong. Like, I just want to go back to what was normal before, but normal's forever changing. And
Yeah.
as time's gone on, my approach has gone more and more back to that. That's who I was, I think. So it's gone back into that, process driven, very competitive person. And I've just had to adjust those skills to now it's within coaching. And, now it's every day when I wake up and embracing my own struggles every day. They look a little different than they once did, learning to get the same enjoyment out of them, because I think the reward now is greater, although it used to be a medal, or it used to be a sponsorship or money or whatever it was. Now it's the satisfaction of being the best version of myself under very trying circumstances. And that's
Mm.
extremely, self gratifying and rewarding.
Thanks for sharing that story, bringing us into that, and sort of allowing us to see some of the pain that you felt and the process that you've gone through, and some of the joy that you're finding as well. Like you just said, the things that you view differently now as opposed to then, and in some ways, I think you said they could be more rewarding. And that's really
Yeah.
powerful. And like you said, you're coaching now, and I also mentioned this in the intro, gearing up for the 2021 Tokyo Olympics. From your experience as an athlete and a coach, what can a coach do to have the biggest impact on their athletes?
I think the biggest thing is you've really got to ride the roller coaster with them, but also be in order to be a proper shoulder to lean on under the highest pressure times. So that means, being riding that wave with them day in, day out, and removing
Mm,
yourself a little bit from the emotion of the situation, and being able to be a calm um, figure that can assist in making decisions, and can also reinstate confidence when needed, and fuel it also when needed. That was something that I feel that I lacked a bit in my career, was I never really found that strong shoulder to lean on in from a coaching standpoint, that can be really powerful, that relationship. And
mm,
so I think that's probably the number one thing, yeah, that you can provide, as well as obviously the planning and the structure, and helping the athlete have confidence within that plan,
mm.
and helping them to understand that plan in order to guide through the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows of sport.
Yeah, you definitely got to that plan and the process and the knowledge and expertise, but it's interesting you started with the relationship. You started with this interaction. You started with just like, they're going to go with the ups and downs, they're going
Yeah.
to be with you. They're going to be a shoulder that you can lean on.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that athletes are human
Mm,
first, and you have to, they're not machines, and they're not
mhm.
robots, and it's about adapting to their individual personalities, and their individual traits, and learning how to, you know, the program has to suit them as much as they have to suit the program.
I want to pause this podcast for a moment to let you know about another great podcast.
Hey everyone, my name is Mike Dunn, and I'm one of the co-hosts of Rethinking EDU. Our podcast is a roundtable discussion about education possibility. We talk with professionals from around the country who are doing groundbreaking work reimagining and remaking schools. Come check us out at rethinkingedu.co or wherever you get your podcasts.
Now let's get back to the show. That's such a good reminder to be reminded of relationships are the foundation. Students aren't machines. This isn't a machine learning, this isn't
Right.
AI in school buildings, but relationships should and could and hopefully will continue to be the foundation of effective school and learning.
Yep.
Sam, this has been so great talking with you today. As we wind things down, who do you want to give a shout out to?
I guess I'll give a shout out to my family and any young striving people in the world and out there that are daring to dream big and in whatever that might be, chase it down.
Time for the final word. What would you like to say to close out this podcast?
I think the biggest thing is don't confuse goals with expectation, and keep the drive internal.
Sam, thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been a great and wonderful, enlightening conversation. To those listening, thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Diving Deep EDU. If you like this episode, subscribe, share it out, post a review on Apple Podcasts. All of those things will help get this podcast out to more people. Until next time.
Wow, it's time to reflect. That's astounding. You've been checking out the podcast from Matthew Downing. Hope you like diving deep like a scuba diver. And the show provoked hope, that's our true desire.